Okay, so let's get this drawing started. I'm going to start my composition here, and basically what we're drawing is the white sphere. It's going to be almost a perfect circle, so I'm just going to trace an object, a round object with a piece of vine charcoal as the beginning of my composition. And then from my perspective, the background cuts off this object about here. So we have a very simple composition. We want to talk about how to make a charcoal rendering out of this. All right, so I should lower this. Okay, so first off, what I'd like us to do is to notice the overall still life. Tell me what are the whitest parts of the drawing of the object that you see. Yeah. Right. So ultimately, when we're gauging the still life, we're going to identify the lightest part of the composition, and then what did you say the darkest part of the composition is? Shadow as it hits the table, right? So okay, so let's say that the brightest highlights that you see, those tiny little points of light, that's pure white of the paper. Okay, so everything else has to be gray to make that look like it's white, correct? And then let's call the darkest part of the composition that the shadow. So that's going to be like the compressed charcoal that we use. So most of our composition is actually going to be vine charcoal. Okay, so this is the way that I would start. I'm going to start just with the base background here, and I'm just going to take a piece of vine charcoal, break it off a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to start to fill this in. If you want to try to break the surface of it a little bit first, sometimes if you want to use your sandpaper pad, you can kind of like, take that edge off a little bit. It's going to be a little squeaky at first, but then you're just going to fill it in kind of nice and evenly. All right, go around your object and work in more than one direction. So horizontally and vertically, or even circular. Also, you can leave a little border if you want to. You can draw a little border here. It's hard to push the value right to the very edge of the page, but don't be afraid to give yourself a little window to work with there. Something like that, it's fine. It should have, yeah, but if you don't have something, yeah, go ahead and take a few. I have a lot more in the cabinet, so you can take a box to do it. All right, so we're just going to spend some time kind of painting the walls here, right? Just coloring it in. All right, so this is kind of what we're looking for, folks. All right, the base of the table is going to be this middle gray, blend it in. It's still pretty fragile. Like I can take my finger and kind of still push it around, but that's okay. You just want to get it blend in as smooth and as even as you can. All right. So the next step is, it's going to be variant for everybody, but would you say the background is lighter or darker than the tabletop? Like if you averaged out the background, would you say it's lighter or darker? Darker, yeah. I agree. I feel like in most cases around the room, the background is going to be a little bit darker than the tabletop, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in value in the same way. I'm going to put a flat tone of the vine charcoal again in the top, but then I'm also going to add some of the the compressed charcoal as well. Okay, so it'll make it overall. So I guess step 2 would be same thing. Bring in a nice even value to the top. And I pressed around the object. And then Okay, so now that I've got my background, that base tone, I'm going to take a piece of the compressed charcoal, and this is just the stick kind of block, right? And then I'm just going to very lightly start to add in a little bit of value at the top, kind of a bit of circular motion. That way I can push this around a little bit darker. So here you can see with the compressed on top, notice how I can get this to go overall a shade darker. So this would be a way that you could get just a little bit darker than the vine charcoal, but maybe not totally black. All right, so this is kind of the starting point of everything, right? And when we're drawing with charcoal, it's helpful to get kind of a wide range of the base tones down to begin with, because it helps you to see the contrast and the value of everything a little bit better. So, you know, whenever we're working in black and white, we have to think about the contrast range, and that means the range between the brightest areas and the darkest areas, and then all those kind of grays in between. But it is that those end things, the white and the black, those two extreme points kind of gauge the whole composition, how we read it. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm just going to kind of draw in where I see those white highlights. I'm just going to make a little mark. So I'm going to try to avoid putting tone into these areas. I'm drawing them a little bigger than they are, but that's just because I want to make sure that I keep them part of the composition. Yeah. So I'm seeing the highlights there. I'm also seeing these windows reflected into the scene. So I'm just going to draw that a little bit as well, which is just simple arc like this. And then a couple of the window shapes that start to get stretched out a little bit like that. So what I'm going to do is just work around those areas to try to keep them as white as I can. All right. So again, I'll just break the vine into a little bit smaller piece. And I'm just going to add. I'm not going to press too hard. What I want to do is to create an even tone, but I want to be able to erase it, right? So now that I've gotten this far, what I'm going to do is, I'll probably do the shadows on the ground flat, but I'm going to start to work into the sphere, and I'm going to use my eraser for a little while here. What I want to try to do is get the subtle transition that I see from the edges to the center, and then significantly make the top overall a little bit lighter than the whole composition, because I definitely see where the light is hitting the top. I would say third, kind of the most. It transitions to the middle, which tends to be a little bit darker, but it's also like translucent a little bit, so it's highlighting the edges a little bit more than the center. So that's what I'm going to try to work with the kneaded eraser. And I like to kind of just make it flat, again, like a pancake, and kind of just start to polish in these areas as I go. So it's a light touch to begin with, just kind of like, also erase in the direction of the sphere, right? So make curving arced erasure marks as you go through this so that it helps to reinforce the form of the object. All right, so I think I'm ready to, I'm going to go into this more, but I'm going to start working on the shadows in the ground. And there's like a million shadows. So I'm just going to choose 3 because there's a lot of circles there. So I'm going to do the main big one kind of cascading to the side, and then one that kind of kicks around the back. So I'm just going to use, my fine circle here and sort of pinpoint some of those shadows that I've seen cascade around this object. I've got 2 main shadows, and I'm going to need to use the pressed charcoal here to make it overall darker. Probably the lightest shadow is this combination here, so I'm just going to darken this in some of the vine charcoal first. It has to be a little bit overarching, a little bit darker, kind of loose on the page. This one is going to be definitely the darkest where all of them converge in that middle zone. So I'm going to push that in here a little bit. A little bit darker, using that page. One of that in. And that can also be used in some of these other areas. So what's nice about having some compressed charcoal down is you can grab some of it. I'm blending this in, and I'm going to pull it and push it over here. So It's just on my finger, so I'm kind of pushing it into those areas. That needs to go just a little bit darker. Okay, so I've got the 3 levels of my shadows kind of working now, and I can definitely see some contrast making this pop off the page a little bit more. So now the proof is really in all the details, how you kind of get this to shape up. Anything, all the little components you can notice, any of the little sort of detail things. It is helpful to use your compressed charcoal pencil when you want to cut in certain areas. So if I wanted to make sure that this edge was a little bit darker up through here, I can start to bring some of the charcoal pencil in. But those details should all come towards the end. Additionally, sometimes I'll take my white eraser and I'll cut it off into a little nugget like this. And that way I can go into some of those really fine details, make them really bright and start to pull out some of those highlights and make them look more effective. It's a good drawing tool to use, and you can get a lot of great, tone out of it. Again, you just don't want to use a white eraser at the beginning of your drawing because it could have potentially leave some marks that aren't very cyclic, right? So the little tiny white eraser is great for going in and cleaning up areas and edges and things like that. And I just like to take a knife and trim it down to make a little piece that I can work with.